Hi, in this session we will learn about different components of Azure Data Factory. We will see pipelines, activity, datasets, copy data tool, linked services, data flows, parameters, integration runtime, looping, variables, lookups, and triggers. Let's start with learning pipelines. Pipeline is a logical grouping of activities that perform a unit of work. You define work performed by ADF as a pipeline of operations. It is created to perform a specific task by composing the different activities in the task in a single workflow. Data Factory might have one or more pipelines. Pipeline can be run manually or run using a trigger. Activities in a pipeline can be chained together to operate sequentially, or they can operate independently in parallel. You can create a pipeline by Azure Portal, Visual Studio, PowerShell, .NET API, REST API, or Azure Resource Manager template. What is an activity? It is a specific action performed on the data in a pipeline, like the transformation or ingestion of the data. Activity represent an individual processing step or task in a pipeline. Activities in a pipeline define actions to perform on your data. It can be executed in both a sequential and parallel manner. It can either control the flow inside a pipeline or perform external tasks using services outside of Data Factory. For example, you might use a copy activity to copy data from one data store to another data store. There are three kinds of activities in Data Factory: data movement activity, data transformation activity, data control activity. Let us see some of the important activities. Copy activity. We can use the copy activity in a data pipeline to move data from both on-premises and cloud source data stores. Lookups. Lookup activity allows you to execute a stored procedure and return an output. It can retrieve a dataset from any of the data sources supported in Azure Data Factory to dynamically determine which objects to operate on in a subsequent activity, instead of hard coding the object name. Power Queries activity build and execute Power Query mashups to perform data wrangling in Data Factory pipeline. For each loop activity is used to execute the same set of activities or pipelines multiple times, with different values each time sequentially or parallelly. Datasets. It is basically collected data users required which are used as input for the ETL process. Dataset represent data structures within the data stores. It represents the data that you want to ingest or store in your activities. Copy data tool. It eases and optimizes the process of data ingestion into a data lake. This tool automatically creates all the necessary resources to copy data from the selected source data store to sync data store. Linked services. They contain information about data sources and services. It defines the connection to the data source. It tells where to find data. Linked services are much like connection strings, which define the connection information that is needed for Data Factory to connect to external resources. Link service defines a target data store or a compute service. For example, you can use an Azure Blob Storage link service to connect a storage account to Data Factory, or the Azure SQL database link service to connect to a SQL database. Integration runtimes. It provides a compute infrastructure on which activities can be executed. Integration runtime provides the bridge between the activity and linked services. It is the compute environment or the infrastructure used by data factory where the activities either run on or get dispatched from. Integration runtime is of three types, which is Azure Integration Runtime. Azure Integration Runtime provides a fully managed serverless compute in Azure. All the movement and transformation of data is done in the cloud data stores. Second is self-hosted integration runtime, which manage activities between cloud data stores and a data store residing in a private network. Third one is Azure SIS integration runtime. It is required to natively execute SIS packages. Data flows. These are special types of activities that allow data engineers to develop a data transformation logic visually without writing code. You can transform data in multiple steps using a visual editor without having to write any other code than data expressions. They are executed inside the ADF pipeline on the Azure Databricks cluster for scaled out processing using Spark. Two types of data flows: mapping data flows, which create and manage graphs of data transformation logic that you can use to transform any size data. Control flow in a data factory is what's orchestrating how the pipeline is going to be sequenced. Parameters. Parameters are key value pairs of read-only configuration. Parameters are defined in the pipeline. The arguments for the defined parameters are passed during execution from the run context that was created by a trigger or a pipeline that was executed manually. Activities within the pipeline consume the parameter values. Variables. It can be used inside of pipelines to store temporary values and can also be used in conjunction with parameters to enable passing values between pipelines, data flows, and other activities. Trigger. A trigger is a unit of processing that determines when a pipeline needs to be run. These can be scheduled or set off by a different event. Triggers initiate the execution of the pipeline. It determines when to execute a pipeline. You can execute a pipeline on a wall clock schedule, in a periodic interval, or when an event happens. Triggers represent the unit of processing that determines when a pipeline execution needs to be kicked off. We have trigger types. First one is schedule. It invokes pipeline on a specific time and frequency. Next one is tumbling window. Works on a periodic interval, like in every 2 hours. Next is storage events trigger. It invokes pipeline as a response to a storage event. While the last one is custom events, which invokes pipeline as a response to an custom event.